read one paragraph. During the observance of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, we celebrate the cultural traditions, ancestry, native languages, and the unique experiences represented among the more than 30 ethnic groups from Asia and the Pacific found here in the United States. We also recognize millions of Asian Pacific Americans whose hard work and love of family and community have helped unite us as people and sustain us as a nation. And here, I want BJ to help present this to Ani.
Thank you very much, and in a few moments you'll get a chance to meet BJ Pack. We'll introduce him a little bit more formally, but now we'd like to introduce one of our featured speakers for tonight, Dr. Jeffrey Humphries. Dr. Jeffrey Humphries is the director of the Selig Center for Economic Growth at the University of Georgia's Terry College of Business. The Selig Center is an endowed economic forecasting and market research center. Dr. Humphries serves as a member of the Governor Deal's Council of Economic Advisors. He also served on Governor Perdue's Council on Economic Advisors. And for 22 years, Dr. Humphries has written monthly State of the Economy column for Georgia Trend magazine. You've probably read it. Dr. Humphries has published more than 250 applied and academic studies regarding market research, economics, transportation, and economic development. That just makes my head spin to have written so much, Dr. Humphries. He is best known for his detailed economic forecasts, but nationally, he is best known for his detailed estimates of the spending power of African Americans, Latinos, and Asian Americans. In fact, I have personally Googled reports from the Selig Center. Dr. Humphries received his BA and PhD in economics from the University of Georgia. He is a member of Phi Beta Kappa and Phi Kappa Phi. He grew up in Athens and currently lives in Tucker, Georgia. Dr. Humphries.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. You know, I give about 30 or 40 speeches in Georgia every year, and about 39 of those are about the state of the economy. So it's nice to talk about something that's a little more upbeat tonight. I'm going to talk about the Asian American consumer market and why B2C companies find that market so compelling. After I go through the U.S. stats, I'll drill down and speak for a few minutes about Georgia specifically. Now, the information that I'm going to present tonight is found in an electronic book that we publish at the University of Georgia called The Multicultural Economy. It's available for sale for about $125 a copy, and basically that fully funds the research that we do in this area. The last edition provides estimates for 1990 through 2012 and projections through 2017. The next edition will be released in the fall and will focus on 2013. Asian Americans are energizing this U.S. consumer market as they never have before. In fact, last year about 17 million Americans, or about 5.4% of our population, claimed Asian ancestry. And this really makes Asian consumers a very, very powerful force in the U.S. consumer market. This market has attained critical mass in a growing number of states. When I started this line of work back in 1990, there were really just a handful of states that had a significant presence in terms of Asian buying power. In fact, even by 2000, the turn of the millennium, only 6 states had at least $10 billion in Asian buying power. Last year, that number had increased to 14 states, and by 2017, about 20 states will have at least $10 billion in Asian buying power. And Georgia crossed that $10 billion threshold 4 years ago in 2009, and Georgia now has about $13 billion in Asian buying power. And billions, a big number still. I know we got used to trillions, and the federal government was out there trying to stimulate the economy, but billions are still big. In fact, sometimes it's hard to put your hand around a number as big as $718 billion, which is the size of the U.S. Asian American consumer market. Basically, if you were to compare Asian American buying power to the GDP, not just the buying power, but the GDP of other countries, the Asian consumer market would be the 20th largest country in the world. Now, what exactly is buying power? I've been throwing that term around. Basically, it's very simple. It's after-tax personal income. So it's what you've got in your pocket after government takes its share. So it's what's available for spending on an annual basis by consumers. It doesn't include monies that might be borrowed from future earnings. It does not include monies that might have been saved from previous years. It does not include spending by tourists of Asian descent. It is basically the buying power of our resident Asians. Now, Asian buying power is booming. And you know, I hesitate to use the word booming because actually booming suggests that this is a sudden and unexpected phenomenon, but Asian buying power has been increasing very, very quickly, really ever since I started this study, which was back in 1990. And so this is not a surprising phenomenon, nor is it really a short-term phenomenon. It's something that really transcends the business cycle. And it's reshaping, really, the commercial and retail landscape of America. You can definitely see that in the Metro Atlanta area, and you can see that in an increasing number of states across the country. Back in 1990, when I first started this research, there was about $117 billion in Asian American buying power. In 2012, just one state had more than twice that amount of Asian buying power, that's California. And nationwide, Asian buying power hit $718 billion, which was more than 5 times bigger than that market was back in 1990. Since the turn of the millennia, we've seen a 164% increase in Asian buying power. And to put that into comparison, the increase in white buying power during that period of time was only 60%. So 164% for Asians versus 60% for whites versus 73% for African Americans and 142% for Hispanic consumers. So basically, Asian Americans have the power to determine either the success or failure of many businesses in America, particularly those that sell products or develop products for households. And there are a lot of forces behind this growth, the most important of which is favorable demographics, in other words, above average population growth. This above average population growth actually predates my study. It started in 1965 with the passage of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. And what that act did is it sort of replaced our national origins-based immigration quotas with a preference system that is based on skills as well as family relationships. Demographics, they really do matter. You know, in 2012, the Asian population was 17.2 million, and that was 54% higher than it was in 2000. where the population was 11.1 million. And that exceeds really the population gain for any other racial group, as well as the ethnic category Hispanics. Of course, population growth alone does not explain the differentials in buying power growth between Asians and other groups. Asian buying power since the turn of the millennia is up 164%, compared to a 60% increase for white consumers. That's a 104 percentage point gap between Asians and whites, and only about 46 of those percentage points can be explained by population growth. So a little bit less than half of the above average growth in the Asian market is due to above average population growth. So what are some of the other factors behind this sustained above average growth? Well, employment gains are one factor. In fact, despite the severity of the Great Recession, Asian Americans have seen job growth. If you look at January 2000 and last month, April of 2013, the number of jobs held by Asians increased by about 2.3 million, despite two pretty tough recessions, and that's a 40% gain. That cumulative gain of 2.3 million is very impressive when you compare it to the cumulative gain for white Americans of 1.3 million, and consider that the white population is much larger than the Asian population. Now, the Great Recession, though, did not spare Asians. The Asian group got hit very hard by the Great Recession. In fact, if you go back to the employment peak for Asians, which actually coincides with the peak of the last expansion, Asians had about 7 million jobs in this country. At its trough in January 2010, which was actually 6 months after the recession ended, Asians had about 6.4 million jobs. So a little bit more than 500,000 jobs were lost. But the good news is that those jobs have been recovered, unlike the number of jobs lost by the total population. Still, the unemployment rate for Asians more than doubled over that period of time, but has since dropped back quite a bit and stands at about 5% as we speak. So the bottom line is that Asian Americans have fully recovered from the Great Recession, at least in terms of the job count. That's something that cannot be said for the total population. Another factor is that almost all Asians live in urban areas. In fact, about 95% of Asian Americans live in metropolitan areas, compared to only 78% of non-Hispanic whites. And people that live in urban areas tend to have higher incomes than those that live in non-metropolitan areas, so that's another factor behind the size of the Asian consumer market. The Asian population is also slightly younger than the overall population. And that's important in terms of buying power growth, because it means a larger percentage of Asians have not plateaued into their years of peak earnings. And that's good in terms of looking forward and projecting ahead. Particularly, we consider that a much smaller proportion of Asians are of traditional retirement age compared to the white population. Again, that's another factor that gives you reason for optimism regarding the continued growth of the Asian market. Now, another really, really big factor, it's almost as important as population growth, is educational attainment. Asians are much, much better educated than the average American. There are lots of stats on this, but I think the one that sort of probably sums it up best is that 51% of Asians that are 25 years of age and over have a bachelor's degree or more than a bachelor's degree, compared to only 31% of the white population. That's a huge 20 percentage point gap in educational attainment in favor of Asian Americans. And, you know, over a working lifetime, someone with a bachelor's degree earns almost $1 million more than someone without a bachelor's degree. So that provides a very, very strong push to the growth of Asian buying power. It's provided a push in the past, and it will continue to provide a push going forward, because what it really means is that Asians hold a very large proportion of top-level jobs in management or in professional specialty occupations. In fact, nearly half of all Asians hold jobs in management, professional specialty occupations. And in contrast, or the flip side of that, is a much smaller percentage of Asians relative to the total population have jobs in farming, forestry, fishing, and other occupations where wages are low. Asians are also much less likely to work in public administration, which helped to some extent shield Asians from the recent cuts in government spending, and is likely to help Asians in terms of their buying power going forward, as they will be less exposed to the inevitable cuts we're going to see in government in the years immediately ahead. Another factor that helped Asians during the Great Recession is that Asians are much less likely to be homeowners than the average American. And given that home prices, existing home prices, fell by about 20% nationwide and by about 30% here in Georgia, that was a good thing in terms of Asians' net worth in recent years. Now, the primary focus of my work and of my comments tonight have been on really the size of the Asian American consumer market, quantifying that. The study I produced actually doesn't just provide U.S. level estimates, but also provides estimates for all of the states. But I also look at how Asians and other groups spend their money. Because if Asians didn't spend their money differently, then these numbers probably wouldn't matter, at least to the corporate sector. The first thing I would say is Asians do spend their money differently, and one reason is that Asians earn much more on average than the typical U.S. household. In fact, Asians earn, and that translates over into spending. Asian households spend 21% more than the average U.S. household, and for that reason, Asians tend to outspend the average American in many product categories. In fact, Asian households spend dramatically more than the average American or the average U.S. household on restaurants, on shelter, not because they over-index in terms of home ownership, but because they over-index in terms of renting. They dramatically outspend the average household on clothing, on shoes, on public transportation, on education, on pensions, and on Social Security. Now, one reason for that is Asians are, again, almost exclusively living in urban areas, and you tend to rent, especially given that a lot of the urban areas out west have very high home prices. There are a number of other categories in which Asians outspend the average household, but not quite as dramatically. These categories include groceries, furniture, new cars and trucks, and fees and admissions for entertainment types of activity. But despite much higher average incomes, Asians do underspend the typical household in a large number of categories. These include alcoholic beverages, electricity, telephone services, I see a lot of smiles out there, housekeeping supplies, used cars and trucks, healthcare, because if you spend less on alcohol, you're going to spend less on healthcare, televisions, radios, sound equipment, pets, toys, playground equipment, tobacco, smoking supplies, and cash contributions. So Asians do spend very differently than the average U.S. household, but they spend a lot more. Now let's drill down a little bit and look at Georgia's Asian market. And the numbers are very, very compelling for Georgia. In fact, I consider Georgia to be one of the nation's very rapidly emerging Asian consumer markets. Georgia ranks 12th among the states in terms of the size of its Asian consumer market, and our state wasn't even on the radar screen when I began this study back in 1990. In fact, in 1990, Georgia's Asian households only had about $1 billion in buying power. That number was $4 billion at the turn of the millennium, and it was $13 billion last year. The 2000 to 2012 increase is 213%, more than tripling Asian buying power. And that exceeds the 164% increase in Asian buying power that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks for the U.S. Asian consumer market over that same period. If you look at Georgia's total buying power, since the turn of the millennium, it's only gone up by 66%. So 213% increase for Asian consumers in this state versus 66% increase in the state's total buying power. In fact, Georgia ranks 9th among the states in terms of the rate of growth of the Asian market since the turn of the millennium. Where our state comes up a little short, though, is market share. We rank 18th in market share or market concentration, with Asians claiming about 4% of the consumer market in this state. But Asian share of our state's market has grown quite a bit since 2000. In fact, it's gone up by 1.9 percentage points. It's one of the bigger increases in market share that we've seen nationally, but still a 4% market share is below the 5.9% market share that Asians have nationally. And, you know, market share is really important because the lower the market share, the more expensive it is for companies to really reach out and touch a consumer, although technology is certainly making that less important than it was a decade or 2 decades ago. So putting it all together, Georgia has the 13th largest Asian market, the 9th fastest growing, and the 18th most concentrated. You know, that really completes my prepared remarks. There are a lot more details about the multicultural economy, about all of the groups that I studied in that electronic book that I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks. And I'm sure that'll put you to sleep many, many nights. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Humphries. And if you would stay up here, we have a thank you award to pass along to you, Ani and Farouk. Would you join me up here?